So welcome to this webinar. Today we are running this webinar at the Legal Aid New South Wales Central Sydney office. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the land we're broadcasting from. My name is Jessica Sullivan and I work in the CLE or Community Legal Education branch. And today I'm joined by Alex Davis, who is a solicitor in the Domestic Violence Unit and also the creator of this fabulous new website. So over to Alex.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me. So we will be talking about family violence law help today, and it's a website for people affected by domestic and family violence. So it's kind of a one-stop shop with information about the law, where to get help Australia-wide, and I will be giving you a whirlwind live interactive tour if the technology gods are on our side. And before I do that, I would like to talk a little bit about the Domestic Violence Unit, which is the team that I'm a part of at Legal Aid. Okay, so the Domestic Violence Unit is a small specialist team in Legal Aid New South Wales, and we're currently made up of about 15 lawyers and 3 social workers. So we work across Sydney with a focus on Southwest Sydney, also the Central Coast, Newcastle and Wollongong. We're mainly family lawyers, but some of us also have criminal law backgrounds, and we do work around AVOs, family law, care and protection, and other kind of related issues. So while we are actually firewalled from the rest of Legal Aid New South Wales, we have the benefit of being able to link in with other specialist parts of legal aid. So, for example, our immigration lawyers. So we're a really busy team and we cover a lot of courts. So our lawyers are at the big 4 family court registries every day, and that's as the Family Advocacy and Support Service, or the FAS. So daily we're at Newcastle, Wollongong, Parramatta and Sydney. And this is a free duty service which helps people affected by domestic and family violence with their family law matters. It's a drop-in service, so your clients don't need an appointment, but do keep in mind that we are going to prioritise urgent matters, so family law watch list matters, recovery orders, and also matters that happen to be in court that day. So the FAS, which we'll talk about a bit more in relation to the website, we also have support workers for clients. So the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service provides those support services for women. Relationships Australia provides the support services for men. So if you do have clients, even if they're privately represented by a lawyer, they can still tap into those support services for help with things like safety planning and referrals and other support. So there is a FAS in every state and territory of Australia, and that was one of the reasons this website's been made, is to make some publicly available information about this service. So we'll come back to that a little bit later on. The Domestic Violence Unit also has replaced the Domestic Violence Practitioner Scheme in the Southwest Sydney local courts, and that's on AVO list days. So if you have a client who has an AVO matter which is in Fairfield, Bankstown, Burwood or Liverpool local court, then they can come and see us there. We're there every week in the safe room working alongside the Women's Domestic Violence Court Advocacy Service, and we're also on the DVPS roster in the other local courts like Wyong, Toronto and Port Kembla. We also do fortnightly advice clinics at Bankstown Women's Health Centre, Burwood Community Service Centre and also Coast Shelter. So each of our lawyers also have a case practice of litigation matters, and they're usually really high-risk domestic violence matters where our clients are at the intersection of multiple forms of disadvantage, so where they'd really benefit from our wraparound support with our in-house social workers. So, for example, clients who might be from non-English speaking backgrounds with vulnerable visa status, at risk of homelessness or with a disability. So many of our ongoing clients do have multiple legal issues, and we might be running a matter both across the family courts for parenting and for property, as well as in the local courts, for example, for female defendants who are primary victims. So that's just a bit about what we do, so you have some background. Okay, so before we swing into the live tour, I just wanted to explain how this kind of project came to be. So back in 2017, Legal Aid New South Wales secured a grant, and it came from the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department, which was to develop a national family violence resource on behalf of national legal aid. So the grant was to develop a national legal information resource about how family violence is managed within and between family law, family violence protection orders, and the child protection system. Anyone who has clients who are affected by domestic and family violence would know that often your client may be in 3 different courts, and it can be really difficult to understand how these issues overlap. So that's what this resource was kind of aiming to do. And the grant was also to create a website landing page, which was to be about each state and territory FAS. So I took a small break from my solicitor duties to manage this project and to develop the resource. And as it is a national resource, and I'm a New South Wales solicitor, it was pretty important for us to draw from the expertise of other states and territories. So especially because when we are dealing with child protection law and what we call in New South Wales AVOs, the laws are entirely different in every state and territory, which can be really confusing, especially for clients who might be cross-jurisdictional or who move. And while family law is a Commonwealth law, there's some small differences in WA. So we really needed to draw from the local knowledge of different legal aid commissions. So first thing that we did was created a community of practice, which was made up with representatives from each family advocacy and support service across the nation. So that was really critical for the development of this resource, and they were all heavily involved in steering the project and checking the content as it was developed and putting forward local subject matter experts to give feedback. So before developing the content, I took the fun task of a national scoping exercise. So auditing about 400 publicly available legal education materials that already exist on family violence, family law, child protection, and AVOs in each state and territory. And what I was really scoping for was what are the most up-to-date best practice resources, videos, websites, fact sheets, booklets. What can we include in this website so that we don't have to recreate the wheel? And where are the gaps where we need to focus our energy on making new resources? So that was a really interesting exercise, and it kind of highlighted that not every state and territory has the same level of publicly available legal information. And so what we kind of decided to focus on was making really easy to understand resources, not too text heavy, needed a real focus on care and protection as it relates to domestic and family violence, because there was a big gap there, and to try and make sure that we had as many useful, practical checklists and things like that. So from doing that scoping exercise, it also gave me the idea of presenting this information a bit differently and more visually. So with illustrations, drawing from easy English kind of concepts, because these can be really complex areas of laws. And as someone who works with clients affected by domestic and family violence and complex trauma, I know how hard it can be for this information to stick. So we engaged a illustrator to translate some of these ideas into images. And we ended up using a Melbourne-based illustrator called Frances Cannon. So all the illustrations on this screen and on the website have been done by her. And I personally think she did an amazing job. So I gave her briefs, about 100 different briefs, and she translated the ideas into images. And we user tested all these images with clients affected by domestic and family violence as well. So the feedback was so positive, basically that it made all the information a lot easier to understand and read, that it was able to grab people's attention and break down the concepts into smaller, more digestible pieces of information. So also through that scoping exercise and through the FAST community of practice, we kind of were mindful how important it was to be careful with the wording and the information that we do include in this resource. So one of the overarching messages you'll notice on the website is for people to go and get help tailored to their specific legal needs, and to link people to those services. So what we realized was we couldn't just make a resource with legal information. It also needed to really have a national database of some of the peak services that people could go and see for specialist expert information. So it's really difficult to keep a database up to date, especially as one person from New South Wales. So we've just tried to focus on the top peak national and statewide services, and there's about 250 that are featured on the website. So as we developed the content for each topic and went through multiple feedback rounds with subject matter experts, FAST community of practice, everything also got plain English edited, and I think that our editor did a great job as well. So the whole website's also been designed from a trauma-informed lens, and that's been in each step of the process. So really embedding principles of trustworthiness, safety, choice, collaboration, and empowerment into the website, its actual functionality, and into its architecture, so how it's navigated. And I think that was really important, keeping in mind the overwhelming stress that people engaging with the resources can be experiencing, and to try and minimize re-traumatization through the website. So the content, language, website design, illustrations, and layout all went through user testing with clients affected by domestic and family violence. So I conducted those interviews with our FAST clients, and they were able to give us invaluable feedback. So that really directed the project and the end results that we have now. So changes were made based on their feedback. It identified further gaps in information that clients wanted to better understand, things we needed to clarify, and the user testing framework that I used was also co-designed with our in-house social workers. So it was really safe and supportive environment to do that user testing. So originally, the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department actually envisaged this entire resource as a book rather than a website. And through the user testing, 90% of our participants said they were very likely to find information online and very unlikely to pick up a book. So with that in mind, we wanted this to actually be useful, and we did decide to make a website. And really important in this website is the safety features. Anyone who may have seen me talk before might know that technology facilitated violence is a topic quite close to my heart. So we've tried to build the website and make it as safe as possible, keeping in mind that, you know, there are always limitations. So we also, as a kind of middle ground with the Attorney General's Department, because we weren't making a book, decided that we would make individual fact sheets for every page of the website, which can be downloaded and which also incorporate these illustrations. So I've made about 80 different fact sheets. They're also pretty nifty because, well, it's more cost effective and easier for me to change as the law changes. But they're really great for community workers, and in particular our FAST lawyers use them a lot to download and give to a client to walk away with something, so that you can print off just the targeted fact sheet just on the information that your client needs. Okay, so I think we'll do a poll.
Yeah, so before we go live into our website, and hopefully that works really well today, we're just going to ask you all a really quick poll question so that we can get an idea of how many of you have either heard about the website or visited it already. So I'm just going to launch that now, so it should be on your screen. So the question is, have you visited the website already? And just select one, no, yes, I had a quick look, or yes, I'm already using it in my work. And I'll just give you a couple of seconds to answer that one. Okay, great. So the results show that 59% of you have not visited the website, which is good. So you're in the right webinar. And those of you who have had a quick look, fantastic. So we can show you all around that. So let's switch back over to Alex and the live webinar, sorry, the live website. Here we go.
Awesome. All right. So everyone can see that we are now on the Family Violence Law Help website. So if you want to play along at home, the URL is familyviolencelaw.gov.au. So I'll give you a quick tour of the main things that you need to know about this website. And usually when you first come onto the website, there is a pop-up with safety information, which basically just says, there's an exit button on this website if you need to use it to quickly get off the website. I'll show you what that does. So that opens a new tab with the Bureau of Meteorology, and it goes back to Google on the other tab. It's really difficult with a website to actually sandbox it so that it doesn't leave a trace in your browsing history. That can't really be done unless it's on an app. Something like the Daisy app does that, but on a website it can't. So the initial safety pop-up is to alert you to the fact that it won't delete the information from your browsing history, and it does have a link to the online safety page. So I'll just show you this page. It's meant to be really simple instructions because it can be really hard for a client to know how to delete their browsing history, especially depending on what type of device you've got. And a lot of the time, the information online is quite difficult to follow. So here we've got information about how you can use private browsing, and I've written this so that you can do it on your computer or you can do it on your phone or tablet. I've tried to limit the information so that it really is just the steps you need and making it as simple as possible. So for example, with deleting your browser history, let's say you've got a phone and perhaps you've got an iPhone, just 3 steps on how to do that. And I've also included a lot of links to the eSafety Women website, who have amazing videos and other instructions with more detail. So didn't want to duplicate an already existing resource that is doing it really well. So we do link to those other resources where we need to. So there's also tips on making sure your technology is safe here, again, linking to things that already exist. But this is a nice place to find some simple information for clients when you're safety planning with them if they're not sure how to do these things in one central location. So that's a little bit about the online safety function. We'll go back to the home page. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, which is pretty important, is that we do have a translate button on this website. I feel like the website's going a little bit slow, probably because we're live streaming it to, I don't know, 55 people, but it will get there in a second. So bear with me. So this translate function is inbuilt and it's pretty handy. There's about 23 different languages. We did user testing with people who spoke different languages and with translators. And because of limited funding, we did end up using an inbuilt Google Translate function. The thing that was quite surprising is that apparently the translations we were told through our clients and through this user testing were really accurate and more accurate than some of the professionally translated resources that they'd been given. So that's the website in Filipino, but we'll go back to English. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to give everyone a bit of a look at is information about domestic and family violence. So when we did the user testing, I found it was quite interesting that a lot of our clients weren't really sure if what they were experiencing was counted as domestic and family violence. And a lot of our clients don't necessarily connect with that language, and it's easier to connect with behaviours. So one thing that people said was important was to kind of have some information about what actually domestic and family violence can look like. So of course we've focused on showing that it's not simply physical, and we have these illustrated lists. I think as a lawyer, it can be kind of handy to have something like this to give to a client. So if you go, for example, to this download fact sheet, it will show you the PDF, which you can give to a client, but especially as a family lawyer, I'll just wait for that to load, it can be helpful to identify different behaviours that might be relevant when you're taking instructions or writing an affidavit. It's really quite struggling here, but anyway, we'll come back to that. In the meantime, I'll show you some of these other fabulous illustrations. So there's a lot of information here. this is quite a terrifying illustration, but anyway. So we'll go back to this tab now. Once it, we'll just leave that for a moment. We'll come back to it once it's managed to load. Okay, so if we go back to this page, which has other information about domestic and family violence, you can find here the myths and misunderstandings has some of the most up-to-date evidence-based research, links to that so that people have resources if they need them, which might be useful for other purposes as advocates. But also we've got information about how domestic and family violence affects children as well as parenting, information about staying safe and also elder abuse. So I might get it to the legal information rather than focusing on the non-legal information. So domestic violence orders is the terminology we've used here. Pretty difficult because you've got different names for AVOs in each state and territory. So when we did the user testing, people noted that it would be handy to have things like hoverovers to give a bit more information about what we're talking about here and to help guide people in where they need to go. So that's what we've got popping up on the screen. So if we, for example, wanted to go to how domestic and family violence affects how you make arrangements for kids when there's a domestic violence order, you can see that all of the information, again, is illustrated with a lot of links and quite simple information. We've also used these drop-down menus wherever possible to try and keep the information contained. So everything's posed as a question so people can decide whether or not it's relevant to them so that they don't need to read more than they necessarily need to. So there's a lot of state and territory specific information for some parts of it. Other parts we've done kind of more general overarching information. So for example, if you wanted to know about property recovery orders, different in every state and territory how they work, and that can also be difficult if you've got a nationally recognised DVO and you need to pick up property in a different state. But anyway, if, for example, you go to New South Wales, you've got information here on how that works and also information on how it works in every other state and territory. So with this as well, I might show you, let's see if this one's gone back. Nope. Okay, cool. All right, so we'll go through family law now. I think that this is something a lot of our clients will want information. And what's been really handy when I'm on FAS and giving clients legal advice is often we will be giving them legal advice about AVOs and family law and child protection. And it's pretty overwhelming to walk away with that amount of information. So giving the clients, when it's safe for them to contact, to look at this website, our little card which has this. I've had clients who've afterwards, after we've given legal advice, gone onto the website and had a look around, and it's kind of reinforced the legal advice that we've given and given it a bit more context and given them an opportunity to read some more. So with family law, we've got information on arrangements for children, which is a very popular page. So here you've got things like how family dispute resolution works, and I think that this is quite a misunderstood area. So this information is quite critical for our clients and has a lot of information from the lens of if you've experienced domestic and family violence. So do you have to go? How can it be made safer? Things that can be put in place. So it's really quite practical information. But one of the things that I haven't quite shown you is, again, always we're trying to encourage people to get legal advice. So we've got this drop-down menu that comes whenever we say get legal advice, and it takes people to the anchored part of the Get Help page so that they can find their local service. So here you go, legal services, it's got legal aid, our FAST service, our women's legal service, you get the picture. So if we go back, I think another really important part of this information that we've got for all of the different areas of law is safety information and how that works in the courts. So for example, we've got information about if you've got fears for your safety at court and what you can do. So this has information about getting a safety plan, practical things like if you don't want your ex-partner to know where you live, but you're starting family law proceedings. So I think that this is a resource that will be really helpful for clients, and I think it's, as community workers, pointing clients to this information is really handy, and using these fact sheets that we've got available. So it's also got tips on giving evidence, and it will be updated. It's already got the orders that can safeguard you. Some of you might be aware that there's a new cross-examination scheme that started, and basically what that means is from now, started on the 11th of March, the family courts and federal circuit courts are able to refer clients who are self-represented, where there's allegations of family violence in certain circumstances, into a scheme so that they are legally represented if their hearing is set down after the 11th of September. So the FAS, the Family Advocacy and Support Service in New South Wales, is helping to administer that scheme, but we're not the lawyers that are doing it, it's panel practitioners. So that's just a bit of background, slightly off topic. Okay, so I'll give you a look at the child protection page. Now, our clients who have care and protection matters are some of our most vulnerable, and having too much information about the specifics and also the different legal tests isn't necessarily useful. So a lot of this information around child protection is more practical advice and guidance, and really reinforcing people to get legal advice. So if, for example, we look at the department want to talk to me about my children, you can see here that we've got information about why that might be, but also we've got specific information about what the department can actually ask you to do. So it's divided up into whether you've experienced domestic and family violence, or if there's allegations that you've used domestic and family violence. So really clear steps here that might be useful for our clients who are in the care system. So I'll just see if we can download one of these. Perhaps it'll be less slow, perhaps it won't. Okay, this one's struggling less, which is great. So here you can see an example of one of the fact sheets, and like I said, these exist for every page, so just print them out and give it to your client, keeping in mind whether or not they're still in a violent or abusive relationship, as to whether or not you might need to also talk about keeping that piece of paper safe and keeping them safe around that. So the other thing to mention with, I guess, the state-specific pages is we have included, like I said, resources that were identified through that scoping exercise. So in particular for care and protection matters, you'll have it broken down into each state and territory, and we link to resources that are in other languages, videos, websites. We've put a lot of effort into those resources and making sure that they are up to date and are really simple ones for our clients to use. So I'll go back to the Get Help page, because I think that while this wasn't one of the things we set out to do when we first started this resource, it's one of the most helpful parts of it. Again, you can download the fact sheet. I've got one of these printed out and next to my computer because it's a really handy resource to have. Some issues there. Next to your computer, so that you know all of the key areas and places to refer clients to. So I'll let that load. But you can see here we've broken it down into lots of different services. You've even got information about financial help with links to, for example, the banks that offer assistance, victim services, the Centrelink social workers, National Debt Helpline. We've tried to make this just, like I said, the peak services, so that it doesn't become completely untenable to keep up to date. And I think it's quite important to know that you can suggest an edit here, and that comes through. So if, for example, the contact details of your service have changed, or you think there's something wrong, you can let us know here. So I'll see how this one went. There we go. So this one's for Northern Territory. There's one for every state and territory. I think it's quite a handy thing to have for I'm so sorry. The computer's really struggling here. So you can kind of get the idea of it. Okay, so these are the main parts of the website, but what I really encourage you to do is take the time and have a look around, because there is so much information on this website. It may look like there's not that much, but it's about 500 pages of written text. So I think that the best thing you can do is have a look yourself. We do have accessibility options as well, as every website should. But I think that's kind of the most important things that I wanted to show you today.
Fabulous. Okay, thank you so much, Alex. We might do a quick poll before we start looking at the questions that have come through. So let's launch that one. Just give me a moment. Get out of there. So I'll just give Alex a time now to have a look at some of the questions that you've sent through as well. Okay. So our second poll question is just so that we can have an idea to obviously keep the website at its best. So the question is, what do you think is the best thing about the website? And you can click as many as you want, or you can just click one. So the options are the downloadable fact sheets, the translations, the illustrations, or that it is a one-stop shop. So, cool. So we'll close that now and share those results with you all, just so you can know. Looking good so far, Alex.
Cool.
Looking good. Okay, fantastic. So let's have a look at some of the questions that have come through. So do you have AVO conditions and explanations in community languages on the website?
That's a great question. So because the conditions that are available on AVOs or intervention orders or whatever are different in each state and territory, what we did is we've included plain English descriptions of the ones that are consistent across, but also we've linked to resources that already exist. So if we go back to can we go back to the screen share? I can probably show that.
We can. Except that I have lost my control panel, as would happen.
Oh, okay, so maybe we won't. That's all right.
Here we go.
We can play the imagination game. Oh, wait, you need that one.
Here we go.
All right, so if, for example, you want to have a look, so we've got information about different conditions that exist. If you go down to the resources part at the end, there is some examples of the orders. Now, one thing that I've noticed that's not actually on here, which I'll update, is the New South Wales Police have made a resource which has easy English explanations of the new plain English AVOs, and there are some other resources that have been recently published. So I can actually add those now to ensure that those resources are there so that you can find them. But there is explanations here of some of the conditions.
Awesome. So we have another question. This is just a clarification, I think, but who did you say will do the cross-examination of self-represented litigants in family violence matters?
Okay, so the way that it will work is that there'll be a direct ban on cross-examination in some matters. So, for example, where there's been a final AVO, or where there's a family law injunction, or where a person has been charged with and found guilty of a domestic violence offence. So in those circumstances, if one of the parties is self-represented, doesn't matter if it's the alleged perpetrator or the victim, that person will be referred into the scheme so they don't have to be directly cross-examined themselves, or so that they don't have to cross-examine the other party. So when they're in that scheme, the matter will be referred through to a special list of lawyers. The people on that list are panel family law panel practitioners who are already on at least 2 legal aid panels. So that's all being put into process right now, and they will have special training on domestic and family violence to be on that panel as well. So it'll be a private practitioner, and that's in matters where the court makes that order. So a person can apply for that order themselves, the court can do it of their own volition, an independent children's lawyer can ask for that order, and where that happens, then it'll be referred through to the scheme. So the clients will actually do the application form once the court's made an order with the Family Advocacy and Support Service, and then it will go through to the list of lawyers and they'll be allocated a lawyer.
Okay, great. So the only other question that we have here is a fairly specific question to a particular client, which we may not have time to answer right now.
The question's basically saying for clients who aren't eligible for legal aid, what sort of support can they get? And I think one thing to keep in mind is with the Family Advocacy and Support Service, there are 2 parts of that service. So there is the legal part, which is the lawyers doing duty work. If, for example, she was self-represented and she came to court on the day, then we would be assisting with duty assistance. But the other part of that service is the support service. So clients, if she, for example, did go and get a private lawyer, she'd still be able to access that support service for safety planning, links to other services, referrals, non-legal advocacy, and just general debriefing and making sure that she's safe. So that is some support that's available despite whether or not you're eligible for legal aid, and also whether or not you're eligible for legal aid, you're still able to access the duty services at the court, the legal duty services, but we're not an ongoing service. So it's not like we're going to take on matters that aren't eligible for legal aid and run them to hearing.
Great. Okay, well, that's all we have for questions at this stage. If you do have more questions, you can email them through to us. And this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel as of tomorrow. But I think that's all. Thank you so much for coming along, Alex, and showing us the website.
No worries. Thanks for having me.